think Marilyn mentioned a little bit. Phil Wilson was involved, and Bruce Hutchinson, and I think Sharon, the Reverend Dr. Sharon Ballantyne, had some influence as well. And it comes from the United Church of Canada and the East Central Region, Ontario Regional Council. They're committed to becoming an open and accessible, barrier-free church where there's full participation of people. Now, this came out of from disabilities, but it's expanded beyond disabilities. So, I mean, we're talking anywhere there is an equity barrier. We look to creating equity around that. So in 2024 at our spring general meeting, it was recommended and accepted by our governance review task group that the Equity Forum become a forum who is accountable to the Council of Elders. And this means that the Equity Forum is now a body appointed by the Regional Council to assist in the work of the Regional Council. And so being on the Equity Forum, attendance is required for 2 Regional Council meetings a year, either in person or online. And in that, you may be required to attend meetings such as information sessions like this, or workshops online as an equity support person. And we have bi-monthly meetings online in January, March, May, September, and November to discuss any equity issues, or just online workshops that are coming up. Any business that arises from that's equity.
I'm going to expand on what Kevin said. The role of an equity support person is to ensure web content, meetings, workshops, or events follow established protocols for equity, accessibility, and communication-related issues. As an example, encourage that all PowerPoint slides comply with an established font, size, and protocol. The equity support person is introduced at the beginning of the meetings with a brief description of their role. On Zoom, you will see an equity support person beside their name, and they can be reached via the email or a private message. In person, we are identified by pink shirts, brilliant pink shirts, that are wearing and/or can be asked to stand for introduction. An equity support person is open to and approachable to work through a solution for any additional concerns that may arise during a meeting or event. We have found comfort increase in recent years for people to bring forward their concerns. Areas of concerns that have been identified are, and this is a list and we keep adding to it, meetings held in accessible locations, visual loss accommodations, materials are sent out 48 hours in advance, scent-free and nut-free environments, assistive listening or amplification of speakers, speakers self-identifying, concerns for dietary needs, sensitivities for chemicals, scents, and food. Materials are printed for those without access to printers or computers. When printed items are provided, some will also have large print. There should be gender neutral washrooms that can be identified temporarily for the meeting. Accessible bathrooms, washrooms. Respect for pronoun use and identity. Inclusive language, also sensitivity to language complexity. American Sign Language interpretation. Accommodations for persons with various mental health concerns, as in a quiet space. So that's the list that we have right now.
on the East Central Ontario Regional Council webpage, you will find under you will find the equity scorecards under teams, forums, and networks. You have to go to the resources. There's two different for tonight, for example, you'll have the equity support person's virtual scorecard, and then there's the one for an in-person scorecard if it's an in-person meeting. So how to use them? Maybe we'll just get if Karen could open one up. So down as we scroll down, as Karen scrolls down, it kind of explains how to use them. So we will put in our name. We'll put in our email, and then you'll be asked to confirm the email and the meeting name and the date of the meeting. So then there's 4 questions. So one of the first question is material sent 5 days in advance, and we've said that this is being recognized as an equitable amount of time for people to review them. If they're sent out more than that in advance, that's even better, but 5 days in advance. And so you can score them. A is excellent, B is great, average, below average. I mean, if you get them like 10 minutes before the meeting, we're going to say that's a D or an E if you want to classify it in E. And then there is a comment section that you can just give some more information on why you graded that so in that manner. So then the second question is respect for personal pronouns. Usually, I mean, if we at different meetings, we will go around and kind of identify our personal pronouns. And I'm just kind of taking a look at the screen tonight. Most of us have already got them in our names right beside us on the Zoom box. So I would grade it as a B, great. And then I'll explain why I did that for comments. Our third question is inclusive language. So were we inclusive? Did we recognize gender? Were we inclusive enough with that language? And so again, you classify it in those, you grade it from A to E, and in the comment section why you did so. And our last, speakers self-identifying. Now this is something we've been kind of I know in previous meetings, I mean, usually like tonight, we've been very careful to, announce the next person who's going to speak. But if we were in a meeting where there was someone with a visual disability, then we'd want to say who's speaking. So the person with the visual disability would recognize it. Like I would say, Kevin's speaking. I'd like to, and so that's kind of where I when I grade, I will say if we're not identifying, or if somebody is not identifying us, I will say it's about an average. So, and I'll add a comment for that. Another one is, I think this one's more of an in-person, dietary needs met. So what was the dietary need? Was someone who was gluten-free. I was, like today, I was at a workshop where there was a gluten-free meal given to an individual who specified that they needed a gluten-free meal. So I would say, yes, excellent. They provided that meal for that person. So that's what I would do there. Scent-free environment. Was there somebody wearing a strong perfume today? If I'm at that meeting, I would say no, there was nobody wearing a strong perfume. We try to be aware of that, so those with allergies can attend a meeting and not be susceptible to an allergic reaction. And then you have to agree to the privacy policy. You check that. and then you submit. Just some other points there that talking about PowerPoint template and information. There's some guidelines there, how to use them. If you're creating a PowerPoint, usually the font is Arial, Tahoma, or Times New Roman, and the minimum font size is 44. Usually a white font on a black background, and this is something that I have incorporated into the services that I do for my 2 communities of faith. And I usually use 44 or bigger, 54, and sometimes 60, depending. And logo, your choice, as you can see above, as long as there's a logo somewhere in the presentation, it does need to be on every slide. And when adding photos, make sure it isn't too overwhelming on the slide, so it doesn't fade out the what you're trying to display as far as print up there.
So here you can see that it's nice, and this particular font was, I believe, 60. We have our logo in the corner, and your logo doesn't have to be on every single slide. I've put it on all the slides, but it does not have to be. So going through, you can see, again, it's nice, and the white stands out. There's not a lot on the slide, so it's easy to read. One thing also to remember when you're doing things is we also have to take into consideration people that are colorblind. How does that look to you? Would you say that's okay, or would you say that that's very hard to read? It's hard on the eyes. The font is hard to read. The white doesn't. It's not a good contrast. So then we go back into our regular ones, and those can also be found. There is a downloadable one on our website. I can put those links in the chat as well.
Flowers in a church or at a meeting, a lot of flowers have a scent to them. Some can be very subtle, but it can still affect people. So fake works or flowers that have no scent at all.
Question for clarification. If we're in a facility, to use your example, the height of the toilet is not accessible, is the expected action to report that to the facility? And second, in a meeting where there's no one who has a vision loss, is the expected action still to self-identify in order to create a new practice and not always put the onus on folks to share their vision loss? I would say yes, to report the action to the facility, or try to whoever is facilitating that, try to it might not always be, it's like, well, we need to install a new toilet right away. It might be an action to try and get to fix the situation for the next meeting, or try to get a temporary solution until we can do that. And the other, it's always good to start a new practice, I would say, because I mean, it's so again, that comes with gender identity, or sorry, identifying those who sometimes people may not want to indulge information like that they have a vision problem. So I would say start that new practice and just say, you know, look, tonight we're starting something new. We're going to self-identify that way, that if there's a meeting where there's someone who does have a vision loss, they won't feel obligated to come out with that information. So it's definitely a good practice to start.
I checked everyone's name here, and except for Susan, Sue, and Suze, we don't really have overlap, but I've been in many meetings where there's 2 Nancys. So to say Nancy C. or Nancy Clark, and that's a really good practice to get into.
2 things. Is a PowerPoint presentation like for church? We often try to fit a whole verse on a screen. Should we be dividing that a little more? We try to doctor it up a little bit with pictures, which is great for those of us who see well. Maybe, like, I'm just trying to better our own communication with our congregation. And the other question I wanted to ask is it necessary to follow all these protocols if you already know everyone in the meeting that you are hosting?
It's Kevin here. I can answer the first part because with my congregations who use PowerPoint, general rule of thumb is usually 4 lines per slide. Because then after that it kind of becomes jumbled. So I will, if there's a verse in a hymn that has say 8 lines, I will break it up to 4, or so that kind of helps. And when you're dealing with font 44 or larger, it's about as much as you can fit in a slide, 4 lines of verse. Second part of your question, it doesn't hurt to start a new practice, especially because there may be times where you may think everyone is is comfortable with what you're doing. Sometimes our health changes, and it might be something that you don't want to divulge to everyone. So it doesn't hurt to start those new practices, start doing those things that make your church more equitable.
I wouldn't mind hearing what you have to do to deal with hearing issues. Like, is there a specific rule of thumb about how close the microphone should be to people's mouths and things like that? We have some individuals in our church that find that it's too loud, and others that find it's too soft. So just trying to get your thoughts on that.
It's Kevin here again. I know some churches are set up to have hearing hearing aids, and I know that's not every church, but we'd ask people to speak, and if it's too loud, to let those know that it is too loud. Some people, and because there's some people who speak louder than others, right? So it's a matter of making sure that we try to make it as equitable as possible, that people can hear, and especially if they do have some hearing concerns. If you do it in a way, if somebody's speaking too loud and you ask them nicely, and it's like, oh, just hold the mic back a little bit, or vice versa, if they're not speaking loud enough, to ask them nicely to hold the mic closer or speak a little louder. And you can say, just so everyone in the meeting or in the congregation or wherever you are can hear what's going on, just for equitable purposes. So I hope that answers your question.
And Karen speaking, and I can also just add to that, again, at our annual meetings, we now have it where it's mandatory that there is 2 to 3 standalone mics, and we will have 3 what we call runners, so that those particular people, it may be some of our equity support persons, it may be someone from the congregation, will take the microphone to the person that wants to speak. So the person just has to stand where they are.
Nancy Clark would just like to point out the importance of using mics. Again, one of my pet peeves, but people say, oh, everybody can hear me. And I always want to say, well, unless you can guarantee that every person in this room will hear every syllable, please use the microphone. It's just a way of being equitable. And
sometimes you're at a meeting and the same person wants to take over, and it's really hard to say, sorry, but your time is up. It's somebody else's turn to speak, or if you're in a table group and that sort of thing happens.
It's Kevin here. And what was suggested to me is that we have somebody hold like a rock, and so whoever has the rock can speak, and so it gives everyone a chance to go around and have their chance to speak. And if they didn't have anything to say, they pass the rock along, and that way everyone in the group who wanted to say something could say something.
At the beginning of the meeting, when you're sort of setting the tone and talking about how we'll proceed, one way is to say, now I invite the people who are kind of quiet and don't speak a lot. This is your invitation to speak up.
One of the things that I often will do in a meeting is simply say, because I don't always like to point out that somebody might be quiet or something, because sometimes people just really don't want to speak and don't want to be pointed out. And I'll just say, does anyone have anything new to add? But the other thing is just to say, anyone who hasn't had an opportunity yet to speak have something they would like to offer. And then just hold that silence and give people time who take a few more seconds than some of us, like myself, who likes to talk a lot. It gives them a second to formulate their thoughts and be able to actually offer something.
Well, I think that equitable listening is important too. Sometimes when somebody says something 2 or 3 times, it's because they don't feel that anybody's listening, that they're being heard. And I think the chair can say, I hear you, and maybe we'll have that in the minutes or something.
Are you suggesting that we take back to our council meetings, for example, a council meeting, the information that you're giving us today and sort of say, by the way, this is where we're heading or should be heading? Is that what you're suggesting we do? Because I'm a little unsure. And I think for our church, with the large group meetings, the big congregational meetings, I think we're doing a great job. I was thinking about our scorecard, maybe not so much on our smaller meetings where we tend to know everybody. Some of our meetings are only 3 or 4 people large. And so I just was curious what the takeaway from this is. Do we take this back to council and say, please be aware of the following?
I think that we want to definitely encourage people to use all the tools for equity and encourage them to make that use. What I would not want is for people to feel that we're imposing this. If we went back to our congregations and said, the regional council has dictated that we must do X, Y, and Z, that would probably not go over well. My husband often tells me, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And that might not be so effective. Might be right, but it may not be very effective. So that's certainly one thing. The other thing I was going to say, and actually Cindy said a little bit of what I was going to say, which is always make sure that you leave space for people to speak, because sometimes we jump too quickly to the next item without actually having permitted people the opportunity who may be processing and need a little bit more processing time. But it's related also to the fact that we increasingly are attentive now to neurodiversity, and I think we all need to be really attentive to the fact that sometimes people don't express themselves the same way. Sometimes they're very direct. Sometimes they don't know how to put together their thoughts, and they need a little bit more time. And I think if we're all attentive to that at the beginning and understand that we're leaving space for all types of interventions, that really helps welcome people with neurodiversity, which I think is something we're becoming far more sensitive to. And sometimes it's that exact neurodiversity that creates the most conflict. And so, when somebody is a bit direct, people can sometimes respond to that really poorly. And that creates conflict when, if we had spoken about it at the beginning and understood that sometimes there are people who express themselves a certain way, I just think it's that kind of attentiveness. I also wanted to flag that none of this is actually black and white. This is all spectrum, right? And there are times when one equity principle will bump up against another equity principle, and you're going to be in a place where you're not quite sure what the right thing to do is. And thinking that through is really, really important. and having a conversation about that openly is, I think, really valuable because it offers people the opportunity to balance their thinking, that they may have come at an equity issue with one perspective, but there are other equity things to be considered, so I just think our Council of Elders in East Central Ontario just had a meeting this past week, well, 2 days ago, I guess, or was it just yesterday? Maybe it was just yesterday. Where the question came up about sort of gender balance of a particular group of people that were being elected. And of course, from an LGBTQ standpoint, when gender is fluid, how do you respect gender balance when there are folks who don't fall necessarily on either of those two spectrums? But likewise, you don't want to force people to say, this is my gender, or this is, like you want to encourage people to use pronouns, but you don't want to impose it on them. So there's there are lots of gray areas in this, and I don't want us to ever feel that we're, that just because we understand equity in a particular way at a particular moment means that it'll always be that way, and that it's etched in stone. So,
Eric, you touched on one thing I was going to bring up around neurodiversity. And one place, well, I've been part of the Moderators Regenerate program. One thing I've really, really appreciated with that is she sent out books. One of the options was audiobooks. That's one of my best ways of consuming books. And so I've been able to actually get through a whole lot easier some of the readings that I'd otherwise really struggle with. There are also fidgets on the tables. Or fidgets available. So for those of us who need to move, because you'll often find me playing a game as we do a meeting, and it's not a thoughtful game. It's one of those mindless games, but it's because I need to do something so I can concentrate on what's happening around me, which looks disrespectful, but it's not meaning to be disrespectful. It's meaning to help me focus. So fidgets are also helpful. I'm also mindful, and this is maybe very particular to me, but when it comes to equity, I don't think it's just particular to me. Mindful of how we can help people participate. I'm a single mom, and I can't tell you how many times there's no childcare available because we just don't have the number of children available to make this happen, but we can pay you for someone, but I don't have a babysitter, right? Not for weekends. Easier now that my child's older. It was a lot harder when he was smaller. But also I know some people can't get away because they'd have to pay for respite care for their spouse because their spouse needs a constant companion, constant supervision. So I'm mindful of some of that, which is background story that you kind of need to know. But it's also something that it's a barrier that keeps people from participating, or if they drive or don't drive, if it's an in-person meeting, that kind of thing. So just what other barriers are there? And one thing I haven't heard, and I don't know how to address it, or being someone who's got light skin, I'm privileged in this way, but what about some of the racial justice issues? I'm thinking back to our regional council meeting last year when we started addressing the remit around the Indigenous church. And a lot of it is pure ignorance that came out, which you don't know what you don't know. But I also know for those of us who have Indigenous backgrounds, it can be really, really hurtful. Some of the language, some of the assumptions, and I don't know how we address that in terms of equity.
It's Kevin here. Those are good points, Aaron, and those are good questions. And as part of the equity forum, these are things that things that we're learning all the time, and it helps us grow. It helps us. And for those who come forward with some of those questions, it adds a new layer to how can we become more equitable in our church. And so I'm glad you brought those to our attention. Thank you.
Sorry, I wanted to tag on to Aaron's comment about meetings and that particular piece around accessibility, which leads me to the question of when we hold meetings. And the accessibility that is sometimes excluding certain folks because they are of a working age and they would normally be at work, or young people that might be in school in the times that we hold our meetings. And sometimes we gravitate to those who are already part of our organizations, but we don't necessarily think about those who we would like to be part. And that kind of exclusion doesn't help us build a broader group of decision makers and participants. So it is a concern too.